When Nathan Beckett, the most feared man in the city, saw a stranger chasing an 8-year-old girl through rain-slicked streets, every person on that block looked the other way. He didn't. One question, 3 words, and the little girl's answer unlocked a case that powerful men had spent years and millions of dollars burying, and tore open a wound inside Nathan that had never healed. Clara Voss wasn't just running from danger. She was carrying proof of something that could destroy one of the city's most untouchable names. And now the most dangerous man she had ever met was the only safe place left. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe so you never miss a story, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from. The rain came down without apology, turning the streetlights into bruised halos and the pavement into something that reflected the city back at itself. Beautiful from a distance, treacherous up close. Nathan Beckett was 2 blocks from his restaurant when he saw them. The girl came first, bursting around the corner of Delancey and 5th, like something launched from a slingshot. She was small, 8 years old at most, wearing a yellow raincoat and a backpack that bounced hard with every step. She wasn't crying. She was running too hard for that. Her face held an expression Nathan recognized instantly. Not from innocence, but from its opposite. The face of someone who knew exactly what was behind them. The man came around the corner 4 seconds later. Built wide, head shaved close, moving with the flat, deliberate efficiency of someone doing a job rather than acting on impulse. No panic in him. No hesitation. Just a man in the rain closing distance with the patience of a contractor finishing a project. Nathan's black sedan was idling at the curb. He opened the door and stepped out. He didn't run. He walked with the kind of purpose that altered the geometry of a sidewalk, the stride that made people rearrange themselves around him without fully understanding why. He was 6'2" and 230 pounds, platinum hair slicked back under the rain, ice blue eyes fixed on a point 20 feet ahead, with the absolute certainty of a man who had already decided how this ended. He stepped into the man's path. They stood 2 feet apart. Nathan let the silence do the work. The man read the suit, the rings, the tattoo above the left eyebrow, the quality of the watch, and arrived at the only rational conclusion available to him. He took 1 step back, then another. Then he turned and walked away the way he had come, preserving some dignity in the retreat, but retreating nonetheless. Nathan turned toward the girl. She was pressed against a building wall, chest heaving, watching him with the particular wariness of a child who had been taught to assess rather than accept. There was a scrape on her left palm. Her dark eyes were serious and steady. He crouched down to her level, slowly, giving her time to read the gesture. "You okay?" She studied him for a beat. "He was trying to catch me." "I know. He's gone." Her eyes went briefly to the corner where the man had disappeared, then back to him. "Do you know him?" Nathan asked. She shook her head. "But my mom does." A small breath. "She said if anyone tried to grab me, I should run and find the loudest, most crowded place I could." A pause. There wasn't a crowd. "Where's your mom?" She pointed down the block toward the narrow alley between a laundromat and a darkened hardware store. Nathan straightened up. "What's your name?" "Lily." "Lily." He said it once. "I'm Nathan. I'll walk with you if that's okay." She looked at his hands, his posture, the way he held himself. Whatever she found was acceptable. "Okay," she said, and started walking. The alley was dark, pooling with shadow. Halfway down behind a dumpster, a shape pressed against the brick. A woman with dark auburn hair plastered to her face, phone gripped white-knuckled in both hands, willing it to ring. When Lily rounded the dumpster, the woman made a sound, not a word, just a breath held too long finally releasing, and pulled her daughter in hard. Then she looked up and saw Nathan. She was on her feet in an instant, Lily behind her, one arm thrown back. Her green eyes went wide and then immediately sharp. The fear organized itself into something functional, already calculating exits. He stopped the man. Lily said, "The one chasing me." The woman's eyes didn't leave Nathan. "He's gone," he said. "But he'll be back with more people. You have maybe 15 minutes before this alley stops being safe." He held her gaze. "I have a restaurant 2 blocks from here. Private entrance. You can come in, get warm, figure out your next move." He paused. "Or you can stay. That's entirely your call." She looked at her daughter. Lily gave a small, serious nod. The woman looked back at Nathan. "Okay," she said. The word cost her something. He could hear it. She was a woman who had spent 43 days trusting no one, and she was choosing now, in this wet alley, on the basis of one interaction. He understood the weight of that. He didn't take it lightly. Inside Marchetti's, the kitchen was still warm from the dinner service. Luca had cleared the dining room and locked the front doors by the time Nathan brought them in. The woman sat Lily in the corner booth and checked her over with the focused economy of a mother who had been doing this for weeks. The scrape on the palm, the state of her sneakers, the quality of her breathing. Lily submitted to this with patient cooperation. Nathan set 2 glasses of water on the table and stood by the bar. Close up, in the warm light, he could read the depth of the exhaustion in her face. Not tonight's fear, but the structural kind that came from weeks of sustained vigilance. Shadows under her eyes. A tightness around her mouth that had been there long enough to feel permanent. "My name is Clara," she said. "Clara Voss." And she reached into her jacket pocket and placed something on the table. A USB drive. Small and ordinary looking. "I have something on that drive that certain people would very much like back." Her jaw tightened. "Or destroyed. I don't think they care which." She held herself very still when she said it. Not the stillness of shock. She was past shock. But the stillness of someone who had been living inside a particular sentence for so long, it had stopped having edges. Nathan looked at the drive. "Who are these people?" She said a name. "Warren Aldrich." The name settled into the room the way a stone settles into deep water, quickly, quietly, with no intention of coming back up. Warren Aldrich was 61 years old, worth $800 million, and had the kind of public reputation that took decades to manufacture and maintain. Hospitals, scholarship programs, a foundation gala that sold out every spring at $1,200 a plate. His face had appeared on the cover of City Business magazine more times than most people change their cars. "Tell me what's on the drive," Nathan said. Clara glanced at Lily, who had finished a bowl of pasta that the kitchen staff had quietly produced, and was now losing the battle with sleep, her chin dipping toward her chest. "I worked for Mercer Dunhill," Clara said. "Corporate risk assessment. Aldrich has been a client for 9 years. 2 months ago, my supervisor pulled me off a routine audit and assigned me to review a set of internal communications. Wire transfers, encrypted files, emails." She looked at her hands. They weren't business records. Her voice went flat, the flatness of someone reciting something they had rehearsed in order to be able to say it at all. Communications between Aldrich and at least 7 other men. About girls. Young girls. Some sourced through youth programs his foundation funds, some through a separate network. She swallowed. Financial records going back 11 years. The architecture of something that had been running a very long time. Nathan's hands rested still on the table. "How did you get the drive?" "I copied the files before my supervisor understood that I knew what I was looking at. I told him I needed a day to organize the structure. He believed me. I was out of the building by 4, picked up Lily from school, packed 1 bag each, and left." She looked at Lily, now fully asleep, her head tipped against her mother's shoulder. "That was 11 days ago. Has anyone else seen it?" "I contacted a journalist, Patricia Dwyer, organized crime at the Times." Clara's voice changed register. 2 days after she replied, she was killed in a hit-and-run outside her building in Chelsea. The silence had weight. 3 days after that, I got a call from an unknown number, male voice. He said, "We know about the drive. We know where your daughter goes to school." That was all. Nathan studied her. She held his gaze. The calculation in her eyes was the same as it had been in the alley. Real, methodical, unperformed. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was assessing whether he was a resource she could afford to trust. "Why this neighborhood?" "I grew up 3 blocks from here." She paused. "I didn't know who you were when Lily ran onto this block. I need you to understand that." "I do." She tilted her head slightly. "Then why would you help us?" It was the right question, the honest one. He respected it. "Because a man chased an 8-year-old girl through the rain tonight," Nathan said quietly. "And that's the kind of thing I don't walk past." It was true. It was also incomplete. But the complete version was something he hadn't said aloud in 15 years, and this wasn't the night for it. The safe house was a brownstone, off a quiet street in the East 70s, maintained by a woman named Mrs. Adler, a retired nurse in her late 60s who kept the kitchen stocked, asked no questions, and had a bedroom on the 2nd floor always made up with fresh sheets. She looked at Lily asleep against Clara's shoulder, and at Clara's face, and said, "2nd floor, room on the left." And that was the whole welcome. Clara carried Lily upstairs. Nathan heard a door close softly, then silence. He stood in the ground floor hallway and thought about Warren Aldrich. Then he made a call. Detective Sandra Reese answered on the 4th ring, rough with sleep and with the particular irritation of someone who knew that calls at this hour were never good news. She was 12 years on the organized crime unit, 3 commendations, and had the kind of persistence that had become a department legend. She also had a complicated relationship with Nathan Beckett that wasn't friendship and wasn't a truce, and existed in a gray zone that both of them had agreed, tacitly, never to examine too closely. She didn't ask for his operation. He didn't pretend it didn't exist. What she got from him was selective and real. 7 a.m., she said when he finished. Cafe on Lex and 63rd. She hung up. Nathan pocketed his phone and moved through the ground floor, checking windows with the habitual precision of a man who had spent his adult life understanding that the difference between safe and unsafe was usually the detail someone else missed. He was heading for the door when he heard movement in the kitchen. Clara was at the counter in a borrowed sweater, hands around a mug of tea. She'd washed her face. Her hair was damp. Stripped of the rain and the adrenaline, she looked different. Not less strong, just more visible. The exhaustion was clearer, and so was the person underneath it. "Lily's asleep," she said. "Good." She looked down at her mug. "Mrs. Adler put honey in it without asking." A pause. "It's exactly what I needed." Nathan leaned against the counter a few feet from her. The kitchen was quiet enough that he could hear the last of the rain against the window glass. "How long since you actually slept?" She considered it with the precision of someone who had been counting. 43 days. He let that stand without comment. After a moment, she said, "I keep replaying the morning Austin handed me those files. Perfectly normal expression. He said I'd been chosen because I was thorough. I thought it was a compliment." "It was," Nathan said. "He needed someone who'd do it right. He just miscalculated what you'd do with it afterward." She looked at him, reading him, the same way she'd read him in the alley. "Patricia Dwyer," she said carefully. "They killed her because of me." "They killed her because she was about to expose them," Nathan said. "You accelerated the timeline. That's not the same as causing it." She looked at her tea. Whether she accepted that he couldn't tell. A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, but full. Then Clara said, "The historical records on the drive. The earlier files, 12, 13, 15 years back. I didn't review them in detail. I was focused on the current operation." She looked at him. "But they're there. Everything from the beginning is there. Nathan went very still. Something shifted behind his eyes. A tectonic movement, barely visible. "My brother," he said. "Cole. He disappeared when he was 12. 15 years ago." The kitchen was absolutely quiet. The investigation went nowhere. Wrote it up as a runaway eventually. His voice was level, controlled. "I spent years believing it was random. The kind of terrible thing that happens to some kids with no architecture behind it." He paused. "I stopped believing that about 6 years ago." Clara set down her mug. She was looking at him with the focused stillness of someone who had just understood the shape of a thing that had seemed shapeless. "The records go back at least 11 years, she said quietly. "The earlier ones might go further. I don't know what names are in them." She held his gaze. "But when we get to a safe place to open the drive, I'll look." Nathan stood in the warm, quiet kitchen of a house that wasn't his, in a city that had cost him more than most people understood, and he looked at a woman who had been running for 43 days and was still standing. He straightened up from the counter. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow morning we meet with Reese. After that we start pulling this apart." He moved toward the door. "Nathan." He stopped. She was still looking at him with that careful steadiness. "Your brother," she said. "If his name is in those records, you'll be the first to know." Nathan stood in the doorway. The light caught the tattoo above his eyebrow, the line of his jaw, the diamond catching the kitchen light. He said nothing for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, small, the nod of a man accepting something that cost him something to accept. He walked out into the dark hallway. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. The street was still and wet and shining under the lamps, and somewhere in the brownstone above him, an 8-year-old girl slept without dreaming, safe for the first time in 11 days. Detective Sandra Reese arrived at the cafe on Lex and 63rd at 6:58, 2 minutes early, which was the only way she knew how to arrive anywhere. She was a compact woman with short gray hair and the kind of face that had been called no-nonsense. So many times the phrase had essentially become part of her name. She set her coffee down across from Nathan and looked at him with the expression she reserved for conversations that were going to be expensive. "Talk," she said. He talked. He gave her Clara's name, the firm, the drive, the 11-year timeline. He gave her Aldrich's name, and then he waited. Reese didn't flinch. She was the kind of woman who had trained herself not to flinch at anything, because flinching communicated information to the room, and Reese preferred to be the one collecting information rather than the one offering it. But something shifted behind her eyes, slow and tectonic, like bedrock adjusting to new weight. "7 men besides Aldrich," she said. "1 federal prosecutor, a hospital board member." She said it the way a surgeon names complications, plainly, without drama, because drama was a luxury for people who weren't responsible for the outcome. "That's going to require careful handling." "I know. If I move on this without building it correctly, it collapses. These people have lawyers who exist specifically to find the crack in the foundation. One procedural error, one piece of evidence that isn't airtight, and they walk." She wrapped both hands around her cup. "I need time." "How much?" "Enough to do it right." When he mentioned Patricia Dwyer, Reese's jaw tightened, barely, but he saw it. "Dwyer worked a source of mine 2 years ago," she said quietly. "I heard hit and run. I didn't hear connection." "There's a connection." She looked at the window for a moment. Outside, a cab cut off a delivery truck, and both drivers gestured at each other without stopping. "I need the witness," Reese said. "Formal cooperation, on record. She'll agree." Reese gave him a look that lasted 2 full seconds longer than was comfortable, the look of a woman assessing whether the certainty behind that statement was professional or something else. Then she let it go. "Copy of the drive tonight," she said, standing and pulling on her coat. "My own analyst on the financials, quietly." At the door she stopped and turned back, and her voice dropped a register. "Nathan." He looked at her. "Patricia Dwyer," she said. She had a daughter, 8 years old. She held his gaze for a beat, long enough to make sure the weight of it landed, and then walked out into the cold morning without waiting for a response. Nathan sat alone at the table. The city moved past the window in its ordinary morning rhythm. Taxis and pedestrians, and a woman with a dog too large for the sidewalk, all of it continuous and oblivious, and entirely indifferent to what was now in motion. He paid for the coffee and walked back to the brownstone. He found Lily at the kitchen counter with a notebook, drawing something complicated with a blue pen, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Clara was at the table with her laptop, and Mrs. Adler was at the stove producing something that smelled like cinnamon and cardamom. The scene had the quality of something borrowed, an ordinary morning that belonged to people whose lives were ordinary, lent temporarily to people who desperately needed it. Nathan sat down across from Clara. "Reese wants to meet you," he said. "Tonight, if you're willing. She needs your formal cooperation on record." Clara's eyes came up from the screen. There was no visible deliberation, no visible fear. Or rather, the fear was there, but it had been organized, categorized, put in its place. "When?" "I'll arrange it for 8 o'clock, somewhere neutral." She nodded. Then she glanced at Lily and back at Nathan. "There's something I need to tell her myself," Clara said, lowering her voice. "The earlier files, the pre-2016 records. I only looked briefly, but what I saw suggests the sourcing network goes further back than Aldrich's people anticipated anyone finding." She closed the laptop with a quiet click. "If those records contain what I think they contain, this is also a cold case investigation." Nathan looked at her. Across the kitchen, Lily had finished her drawing and was now examining it critically, tilting her head to one side. Mrs. Adler hummed something low and wordless over the stove. Nathan said, "Then we go through those files today, before tonight." Luca called at 11 with the flat, precise efficiency of someone who had been working since before sunrise. The tracker was Clara's laptop, IP addresses logged through a monitoring service that Mercer Dunhill had activated the afternoon she walked out. The service had flagged her location 3 times in 11 days. The man who had chased Lily was named Garrett Poole, freelance, twice connected to a security firm called Meridian Consulting. Meridian's primary ongoing contract was the Aldrich Foundation. Nathan ended the call and went upstairs. Clara was sitting on the edge of the bed, Lily asleep beside her, the laptop open on her knees. He said it directly. The way she had shown him she preferred to receive information, without packaging, without softening. "Your laptop has been tracked since the day you left. IP monitoring. 3 logged locations in 11 days. That's how they found Lily last night." Clara looked at the screen for a moment. Then her jaw set, not with panic, but with the concentrated fury of someone who had just had 11 days of fear. 11 days of moving and hiding and rationing sleep and holding herself together for her daughter, explained by a single sentence. She closed the laptop and placed it on the nightstand, with the careful deliberateness of someone putting down something that had been used against them. She looked at Lily asleep, the rise and fall of her, the complete unconscious trust of a sleeping child. Then she looked up at Nathan. "How long before they locate this address?" "If it stays closed, we have time." "Then let's use it." They worked through the afternoon at the kitchen table, Luca's clean laptop open between them, the copied files sorted into folders that Clara navigated with the efficient precision of someone who had built the architecture herself. She walked Nathan through the shell companies and the wire transfer patterns, the communications that named names and dates and amounts with the particular immodesty of people who had never believed they would be read. It was exactly what she had described at Marchetti's that first night, and worse than what she had described, and larger than either of them had said aloud. When she opened the folder labeled Archive, pre-2016, the kitchen was very quiet. Mrs. Adler had taken Lily to the back garden to feed pigeons from a paper bag of breadcrumbs. Through the window, Nathan could hear Lily's voice, high and clear, narrating something to Mrs. Adler about which pigeon had the most personality. A completely ordinary sound. A sound from a world that hadn't broken yet. Clara moved through the earlier files slowly. Nathan watched the screen without speaking. The files were organized by year, and within years by a sourcing code that Clara had cracked during her 2 days at Mercer Dunhill. 2015, 2013, 2012, 2011. She stopped scrolling. She looked at the screen. She looked at Nathan. "Nathan," she said. Her voice was careful, very low. "There's a name here from 2011. She turned the laptop so he could see. The name was Cole Beckett, 12 years old. Sourced through a youth mentorship program in Lower Manhattan. Funded at 2 organizational removes from Warren Aldrich, acquired in September of 2011. Nathan read it once, then again. His hands were flat on the table, very still. The sourcing notes were methodical. Name, age, neighborhood, program, assigned code, date. September 14th, 2011. A Tuesday. He remembered that Tuesday. He had been 17 years old and had spent the evening at a friend's apartment 3 blocks away, watching a game, eating pizza, doing nothing in particular. He had told himself his brother was fine. He had told himself one evening was safe enough. Outside, Lily laughed at something. A bright, uncomplicated sound that came through the window glass and sat in the room alongside the thing on the screen, with a quality that was almost unbearable. Clara didn't speak. She understood, in the precise structural way she understood most things, that there were no words available for this, and that the most honest thing she could give him was the silence in which to hold what he was holding. After a long time, Nathan said, "Send everything to Reese, tonight. All of it." The words were very quiet. He stood from the table and walked out of the kitchen. He stood in the hallway with one hand flat against the wall and breathed, not performing calm, simply locating it, finding the floor of himself under the thing that had just opened. Then he straightened up. He buttoned his jacket. He went back in. Reese moved with the efficiency of someone who had been waiting for exactly this kind of case her entire career. Financial analysis by Friday. Grand jury subpoena by Monday. Aldrich's passport flagged with border control by Tuesday morning. He didn't run. He retained 7 attorneys and issued a statement through a publicist, and his foundation released a letter of full confidence. 14 organizational boards published letters of support. The machine was formidable, and it had worked before. It didn't work now. The sourcing records were too specific. The financial traces were too clean. Clara's testimony before the grand jury on a Thursday morning was 2 hours of devastating, methodical precision. The architecture of a decade-long operation dismantled column by column, number by number, name by name. Reese told Nathan afterward, in her flat, understated way, that the prosecutors had said it was the most complete presentation they had ever received from a witness in a case of this scope. The machine cracked when a property developer named Strand walked into a precinct the following Wednesday and said he wanted to cooperate. He kept saying he had a daughter. He said it, the way people say things when they are trying to make a fact into a shield. The arrests came in a cascade. Aldrich on a Friday morning at his Central Park penthouse, led out past his housekeeper, his assistant, his security detail, who had each already made their own calculations about where their loyalty now lived. He said nothing. 6 others within 72 hours. The federal prosecutor, the hospital board member, Strand himself, 3 more. The story went national by the weekend and then international. Clara's name stayed out of every document. In every filing, she was witness 1, a small anonymity that Reese had demanded and fought for because she understood something that the prosecutors, focused on the architecture of the case, were in danger of forgetting. That the woman who had made all of this possible had a daughter, and a life that needed protecting after the headlines were gone. Nathan ensured one other thing, the 2011 sourcing record, Cole's name, Cole's record. was passed through a channel that allowed the cold case unit to open a formal investigation into the disappearance of Cole Beckett, age 12, last seen in Lower Manhattan in September of 2011. It would not bring Cole back. Nathan had not allowed himself to imagine that it might, but it would establish what had happened, and how, and by whose hand, and that was a different thing from nothing. It was the truth. It was the record. It was the accounting. On a clear Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after Aldrich's arrest, Nathan was at Marchetti's corner booth when Mrs. Adler called to say that Clara and Lily were asking if they could come by. They came through the front door. Lily walked beside her mother with her backpack on and looked around the restaurant with the frank inventory of a child assessing a new environment. She looked at Nathan and said, without any preamble, "Mrs. Adler says you have the best pasta in the city." Clara made a sound that was almost a laugh. "That's accurate," Nathan said, and gestured to the booth. Lily had the pasta. Clara ordered tea, and then, after a moment of looking at the wine list, changed her mind. They didn't talk about Aldrich or the trial or the files or any of it. Lily talked about a book she was reading, a girl who found a door in a library that opened onto somewhere else entirely. Clara talked about an apartment in the West Village with good light and a fourth-floor view. Lily mentioned that the building had a cat in the lobby and said it as though this settled every remaining question. At some point, Lily fell asleep in the booth with her head on her backpack, exactly as she had fallen asleep on the first night, and Clara looked at her daughter with the expression Nathan had seen before. Love without performance, complete, unguarded, made of something that didn't require an audience. She looked up and found him watching. She didn't look away. "Thank you," she said. Simple. The direct, honest acknowledgement of one person to another who had done a real thing. Nathan looked at her steadily. He thought about Cole. He thought about the document now sitting in a case file in a building across the city. Cole's name, Cole's age, the year of it. About 15 years of not knowing, and how knowing, even this late, had changed the shape of something inside him. Not healed it. He was too honest with himself for that. But given it edges, made it a thing with a name, made it real in a way that could be carried differently than the shapeless weight it had been. "There was a boy," he said. Clara was very still. "He didn't get someone who stepped into the path," Nathan said quietly. "Nobody showed up for him. Nobody asked him the right question." He looked at the glass in front of him, the untouched bourbon he always ordered and never drank. "All I can do now is make sure it doesn't happen again the way it happened to him." The restaurant was quiet around them. Clara looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "He would have been glad you were there for her." Something moved across Nathan Beckett's face. Not a smile, but the space where one could live. Something full rather than empty. He looked out the window at the city moving through its ordinary Tuesday evening, indifferent and continuous, and somehow, tonight, almost gentle. He left the bourbon on the table, untouched, the way he always left it. "Yeah," he said, very quietly. "I think he would have." The end. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button. Subscribe so you never miss a story and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're listening from.